Brought to you by WikiVidi.com. Aphra Behn. Aphra Behn, the 16th of April 1689, was a British playwright, poet, translator and fiction writer from the Restoration era, as one of the first English women to earn her living by her writing. She broke cultural barriers and served as a literary role model for later generations of women authors. Rising from obscurity, she came to the notice of Charles II, who employed her as a spy in Antwerp. Upon her return to London, and a probable brief stay in debtors' prison, she began writing for the stage. She belonged to a coterie of poets and famous libertines such as John Wilmot, Lord Rochester. She wrote under the pastoral pseudonym Astrea. During the turbulent political times of the Exclusion Crisis, she wrote an epilogue and prologue that brought her into legal trouble. She thereafter devoted most of her writing to prose genres and translations. A staunch supporter of the Stuart line, she declined an invitation from Bishop Burnet to write a welcoming poem to the new King William III. She died shortly after. She is famously remembered in Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own. All women together ought to let flowers fall upon the tomb of Aphra Behn, which is most scandalously, but rather appropriately, in Westminster Abbey, for it was she who earned them the right to speak their minds. Her grave is not included in the Poets' Corner, but lies in the East Cloister near the steps to the church. Versions of her early life. Information regarding Behn's life is scant, especially regarding her early years. This may be due to intentional obscuring on Behn's part. One version of Behn's life tells that she was born to a barber named John Amos and his wife Amy. Another story has Behn born to a couple named Cooper. The histories and novels of the late ingenious Mrs. Behn states that Behn was born to Bartholomew Johnson, a barber, and Elizabeth Denham, a wet nurse. Colonel Thomas Colepepe, the only person who claimed to have known her as a child, wrote in Astrea that she was born at Astrea, Canterbury, to a Mr. Johnson, and that she had a sister named Frances. Another contemporary, Anne Finch, wrote that Behn was born in in Kent, the daughter to a barber. In some accounts, the profile of her father fits Aphra Johnson. Behn was born during the build-up of the English Civil War, a child of the political tensions of the time. One version of Behn's story has her traveling with a Bartholomew Johnson to Suriname. He was said to die on the journey with his wife and children, spending some months in the country, though there is no evidence of this. During this trip, Behn said she met an African slave leader, whose story formed the basis for one of her most famous works, Orinoco. It is possible that she acted as spy in the colony. There is little verifiable evidence to confirm any one story. In Orinoco, Behn gives herself the position of narrator, and her first biographer accepted the assumption that Behn was the daughter of the Lieutenant General of Suriname, as in the story. There is little evidence that this was the case, and none of her contemporaries acknowledge any aristocratic status. There is also no evidence that Orinoco existed as an actual person, or that any such slave revolt, as is featured in the story, really happened. Writer Germaine Greer has called Behn a palimpsest. She has scratched herself out, and biographer Janet Todd noted that Behn has a lethal combination of obscurity, secrecy and staginess, which makes her an uneasy fit for any narrative, speculative or factual. She is not so much a woman to be unmasked as an unending combination of masks. It is notable that her name is not mentioned in tax or church records. During her lifetime, she was also known as Anne Behn, Mrs. Bean, Agent 160 in Astrea. Career. Shortly after her supposed return to England from Suriname in 1664, Behn may have married Johann Behn. He may have been a merchant of German or Dutch extraction, possibly from Hamburg. He died. The couple separated soon after 1664, however. From this point the writer used the moniker Mrs. Behn as her professional name. Behn may have had a Catholic upbringing. She once commented that she was designed for a nun, and the fact that she had so many Catholic connections, such as Henry Neville, who was later arrested for his Catholicism, would have aroused suspicions. During the anti-Catholic fervor of the 1680s, she was a monarchist, and her sympathy for the Stuarts, and particularly for the Catholic Duke of York, may be demonstrated by her dedication of her play The Rover II to him after he had been exiled for the second time. Behn was dedicated to the restored King Charles II. As political parties emerged during this time, Behn became a Tory supporter. By 1666, Behn had become attached to the court, possibly through the influence of Thomas Culpeper and other associates. The Second Anglo-Dutch War had broken out between England and the Netherlands in 1665, and she was recruited as a political spy in Antwerp on behalf of King Charles II, possibly under the auspices of courtier Thomas Killigrew. This is the first well-documented account we have of her activities. Her code name is said to have been Astrea, name under which she later published many of her writings. Her chief role was to establish an intimacy with William Scott, son of Thomas Scott, a regicide who had been executed in 1660. Scott was believed to be ready to become a spy in the English service and to report on the doings of the English exiles who were plotting against the king. Behn arrived in Bruges in July 1666, probably with two others, as London was racked with plague and fire. Behn's job was to turn Scott into a double agent, but there is evidence that Scott betrayed her to the Dutch. Behn's exploits were not profitable, however. The cost of living shocked her, and she was left unprepared. 1 month after arrival, she pawned her jewelry. King Charles was slow in paying either for her services or for her expenses whilst abroad. Money had to be borrowed so that Behn could return to London, where a year's petitioning of Charles for payment was unsuccessful. It may be that she was never paid by the Crown. A warrant was issued for her arrest, but there is no evidence it was served or that she went to prison for her debt, though apocryphally it is often given as part of her history. Forced by debt and her husband's death, Behn began to work for the King's Company and the Duke's Company Players as a scribe. She had, however, written poetry up until this point. The theatres that had been closed under Cromwell were now reopening under Charles II, plays enjoying a revival. Her first play, The Forked Marriage, was staged in 1670, followed by The Amorous Prince. After her third play, The Dutch Lover, failed, Behn falls off the public record for 3 years. It is speculated that she went travelling again, possibly in her capacity as a spy. She gradually moved towards comic works, which proved more commercially successful. Her most popular works included The Rover and love letters between a nobleman and his sister. Behn became friends with notable writers of the day, including John Dryden, Elizabeth Barry, John Hoyle, Thomas Otway, and Edward Ravenscroft, and was acknowledged as a part of the circle of the Earl of Rochester. Behn often used her writings to attack the parliamentary Whigs, claiming in public spirits called good oth Commonwealth. So though by different ways the fever seized in all, 'tis one and the same mad disease. This was Behn's reproach to Parliament, which had denied the king funds last years. In 1688, in the year before her death, she published A Discovery of New Worlds, a translation of a French popularization of astronomy, Intuitions sur la pluralité des mondes, by Bernard Le Bouvier de Fontenelle, written as a novel in a form similar to her own work but with her new religiously oriented preface. In all, she would write and stage 19 plays, contribute to more, and became one of the first prolific high-profile female dramatists in Britain. During the 1670s and 1680s, she was one of the most productive playwrights in Britain, second only to poet laureate John Dryden. In her last 4 years, Behn's health began to fail, beset by poverty and debt, but she continued to write ferociously, though it became increasingly hard for her to hold a pen. In her final days, she wrote the translation of the final book of Abraham Cowley's 6 Books of Plants. She died on the 16th of April 1689 and was buried in the East Cloister, Westminster Abbey. The inscription on her tombstone reads, "Here lies a proof that wit can never be defense enough against mortality." She was quoted as stating that she had led a life dedicated to pleasure and poetry. Behn was mocked for her bawdy works and for writing in a masculine style. But she did also have widespread support. Authors such as Dryden, Thomas Otway, Nahum Tate, Jacob Tonson, Nathaniel Lee and Thomas Creech celebrated her work. Critical reputation. Behn is now regarded as a key dramatist of the 17th-century theatre, and her prose work is critically acknowledged as having been important to the development of the English novel. She is perhaps best known to modern audiences for her short novel Orinoco, the tale of an enslaved African prince. It is notable for its exploration of slavery, race and gender. Behn was immensely prolific, writing plays, fiction, and poetry, and translating works from French. She caused scandal in some of her chosen subject matter, often alluding to sexual desire. She was aware and stated that the works would not have caused problems if they had been written by a man. Behn's work frequently takes homoerotic themes featuring same-sex love between women. One of her best-known poems, The Disappointment, is the story of a sexual encounter told from a woman's point of view that may be interpreted as a work about male impotence. Virginia Woolf wrote in A Room of One's Own, "All women together ought to let flowers fall upon the grave of Aphra Behn, for it was she who earned them the right to speak their minds." Behn proved that money could be made by writing, at the sacrifice, perhaps, of certain agreeable qualities, and so by degrees writing became not merely a sign of folly and a distracted mind, but was of practical importance. Following the death of Behn, new female dramatists such as Ariadne de la Riviere Manley, Mary Picks, Susanna Centlivre, and Catherine Trotter acknowledged Behn as their most vital predecessor, who opened up public space for women writers. During the 19th century, both the writer and her works were ignored or dismissed as indecent. Victorian-era novelist and critic Julia Kavanagh wrote that the disgrace of Aphra Behn is that instead of raising man to woman's moral standard, she sank woman to the level of man's coarseness. 19th-century commentator John Doran wrote that her work wallowed in the moral morass. In the 20th century, however, Behn's fame underwent a revival. Montague Summers, an author of scholarly works on the English drama of the 17th century, published a 6-volume collection of her work in hopes of rehabilitating her reputation. Felix Schelling wrote in the Cambridge History of English Literature that she was a very gifted woman compelled to write for bread in an age in which literature catered habitually to the lowest and most depraved of human inclinations, and that her success depended upon her ability to write like a man. Edmund Gosse remarks that she was the George Sand of the Restoration. Behn is now regarded as a key English playwright and a major figure in Restoration theatre. George Woodcock regarded Behn as an important influence on the development of the novel, stating, "It is as a founder of the school of realistic novel writing that Mrs. Behn is perhaps most important." Authors such as Janet Todd detail Behn's unique exploration of race, gender, and sexual agency. However, critic Harold Bloom calls Behn a fourth-rate playwright, and cites the current appearance of her work as set texts in American schools as a case of dumbing down. Todd argues that in addition to patriarchal prejudice, Behn suffered for her dismissal of any liberal agenda going against the tide of the times. She believed in the divine right of kings and aristocratic hierarchies. Todd writes that Behn was contemptuous of democracy and the common man in the street, not expressly interested in human rights for women or slaves or anyone else, and that because she did not support any kind of a liberal agenda, her causes were not cheered by the progressives. She does not easily fit into any mold of proto-feminism. She had come into adulthood following the English Civil War, under the harsh Puritan rule of the Restoration, and regarded political populism as a sign of moral collapse and the triumph of venality. Ironically, the current revival of her reputation rides on the work Orinoco, a story that is taken to promote modern progressive views on gender, race, and class. Todd maintains that the fiction has been co-opted by modern interests, and that such views are not views that Behn clearly expressed. Her reputation is not helped by the fact that almost nothing is known of her first 27 years, and while she was a pioneer, she also faced debt for much of her life and was a propagandist and writer for hire. She was ambitious, desiring fame and literary prestige, which for a woman of the time, and in times since, is often regarded as suspect. Adaptations of Behn in literature. Behn's life has been adapted for the stage in the 2014 play Empress of the Moon, The Lives of Aphra Behn by Chris Bruck, and the 2015 play Exit Mrs. Behn, or the Leo play by Christopher van der Ark. She is one of the characters in the 2010 play by Liz Duffy Adams. Behn appears as a character in Daniel O'Mahony's Newton's Sleep, in Philip Jose Farmer's The Magic Labyrinth, and Gods of Riverworld in Molly Brown's Invitation to a Funeral, and in Diana Norman's The Vizard Mask. She is referred to in Patrick O'Brian's novel Desolation Island. Brought to you by WikiVidi.com. Would you like to know more?